Stand by. This episode of Old News with Dan and Carrie is kind of a groundbreaking episode, and we're glad you're here for it today because, as Carrie has mentioned before, we're old news because Carrie and I are old news people, but our guests are not always old news people. In fact, today's guest, Erin Berge, is what we call a digital journalist, and she has the distinction of being our youngest guest yet. So she is definitely young news, not old news. Erin Berge is an editorial leader and a digital strategist, and she's also done a lot of freelance work for different publications, both print and digital, things like the Isthmus, the Shepherd Express, Discover magazine, where she works right now. And she also wrote a children's book called Olive Takes to the Sea, a beautiful book about a young lady and her boat and her friends. And she can talk more about that. But Erin Berge, great to have you with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
So, Erin,
Digital, gosh.
yeah, we should tell people. I mean, I grew up, or Erin grew up here. I grew up in Sun Prairie too, but Erin grew up in Sun Prairie, and she's the same age as one of our sons, William. They were in the same grade, and Erin always kind of wanted to be a journalist, as far as I can remember. I mean, I remember even before high school, you were already kind of thinking about journalism, and we chatted at one point about journalism, and obviously, I didn't scare you away.
No, yeah, I definitely remember that conversation. And what I remember the most, and actually I still remember it today, is that we talked about how great it is in journalism where you can kind of pivot between two different types of careers. So you can go on into the journalism reporting track, but then you can also pivot to a marketing communications PR role as well. And it always attracted me to that type of career where you can try out a lot of different types of roles.
What was it about journalism so early on that caught your eye?
I actually I think I found journalism more in college just because I remember taking a one-on-one course and having this professor kind of walk through just the history of journalism and how it's evolved over time and where it started. And that's really when I felt really called to this kind of field, just because it felt like it was a way to get involved with the community and learn a lot of different stories from people. I've always really loved hearing people's stories, just in general. And but then also doing it in a very, I don't know, it's an important field. It's important to tell these stories. So it felt like a way to give back to the community as well.
So you said you found it in college when you went to UW-Madison, right? You're a graduate of UW-Madison.
Yeah.
Did you go to UW-Madison with the idea that you were going to get a journalism degree, or did you kind of go and then kind of decided, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Actually, no. I went into college thinking I was going to work in the music industry. I
Oh,
really wanted
really?
to own a recording studio apparently at that young age, but I mean, there weren't any tracks for that in school, so I was just going to go into business. And I took a couple, I took econ and a couple other business classes, and they definitely did not click with me. So I
Hmm.
decided that that wasn't really the track for me. And so it wasn't until, yeah, I had really taken that just kind of brief course or even just class, that it kind of clicked in my brain that I was like, oh yeah, this is more my personality, more my field.
Are you a musician or do you sing or what got you thinking recording studio?
No, I just grew up. I mean, Dan can kind of speak to this, but my group of friends at the time had a band, and
Mm.
I did play violin in high school, and play piano as well. Definitely stopped after high school, so I don't have those instruments in my life today. But music has always been a huge part of my life, and I mean, even today, my now fiance, he's a jazz trumpet player, so we're constantly going to jazz shows and everything, and it's still a big part of my life. But I think at that time, I saw, and in college, I did join the Wisconsin Union Directorate music program, which is
Mm.
where we booked bands and everything on campus,
Oh,
for
cool.
different shows, and for most just free shows for the students. So that was, I think, a good enough avenue for me to kind of keep music in my life. But then for a career, I really thought that, like journalism was really the path for me.
Mhm.
Yeah, Carrie, you have to, Erin, when she was young, my son was in a band with a bunch of other guys. And I think there was a couple of other bands kind of in that class and around that class. So there was a number of kind of rock bands that
Hmm,
were performing out of Sun Prairie High School at the time. And so
cool.
Erin and a lot of her friends, they also, they'd go to watch the bands and things like that. And so it was kind of cool. And I do remember that did you do some Erin, did you do some you know, journalism surrounding the music industry at one time too?
Yeah, I did. I wrote for the Wisconsin Union Directorate Music blog at the time. So
Okay.
I ran the blog. And so we would cover, shows that were coming. We would interview musicians to get that, point of view. And so that's kind of where that came in. And then I did start writing for the student newspaper at the time, the Daily Cardinal,
Yep.
and started in the arts column. So that's kind of where I started covering a little bit more arts and music. And but then eventually, I think a couple of years into it, I switched over to news and news features. So that's kind of what I was reporting at the time.
So
Very
where did
cool.
you go after college?
So after college, I actually I had a study abroad experience at the very end of my time in school. And when I came back, I felt like I needed to go anywhere and everywhere. So I applied for jobs all across the country and landed a digital communications role in Seattle. So
Mm,
that brought me out there to live in Seattle for a couple of years. I kind of stayed within the marketing communications world for a little bit, just because it was a good, salary and everything. And but I always had this, draw to come back to reporting one day. I just really wanted to do
mm,
that eventually in my life.
mhm, mhm.
And so when I moved back to Wisconsin after living in Seattle, I told myself, all right, this is it. This is the time. So I applied to a staff writer role at the Shepherd Express newspaper in Milwaukee. So I started writing for them for a little bit. And then unfortunately, COVID-19 hit 6 months after that. So
Oh,
Cool.
they, it hit everybody really hard. So
mhm.
I ended up having to leave my time at the newspaper then, but and kind of went back into digital communications. But honestly, it kind of led me to my role today at Discover Magazine as a digital editor. So I think, with kind of a blend of digital communications and newspaper storytelling, it kind of all kind of came together to my current role that I have today.
Can you walk us through like a day in the life of what you do today?
Yeah. So I manage the Discover Magazine's website. So any article that's published on our website kind of goes through me and my team. And we're small but nimble. We are able to accomplish a lot, I think, throughout the week. And we work with a lot of great freelancers. So I basically we come up with an editorial calendar for the next month, and assign stories out to freelancers, internal staff, kind of covering Discover's really fun because it's a general science magazine. So we
Mm,
cover any and every topic. So it can be
mm,
dinosaurs, ancient humans, health topics, it can be psychology, it can be shipwrecks, like my latest story in Discover magazine. So I think that makes it really fun. And we're able to kind of choose topics that resonate with people's daily lives in the science world. And so, yeah, so my daily work, I guess, is more just kind of making sure that we have content up on the site, reviewing, editing, publishing, making sure that we're actually keeping a close eye on our analytics. So I follow Google Analytics very closely to see what kind of engagement is on our website currently. So what are there certain articles that are spiking? Are there topics that are really resonating with people right now? And if so, then we tend to assign more articles around those areas as well. So it's a huge mix, and it's always kind of changing every day. But it's fun. It keeps you engaged with content.
So a couple of things out of that, Carrie, that she's saying. First of all, she's a lot smarter than us about.
I was going to say, can we consult after this is
Yeah,
over and you can help us?
we need a couple of your hours. And secondly, there seems to be a theme with you, Erin. I mean, you've got Olive Takes to the Sea. You
Mhm.
did a nice story on shipwrecks. And Carrie doesn't know this about you, but I know this about you. You lived on a boat in Seattle,
Yeah.
right? Like a lot of people. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I did. I lived on a sailboat for a little bit in Seattle.
A sailboat and not a houseboat.
Yes, a sailboat.
Whoa.
Yep. When I was living out there, I really wanted to live on my own at the time, and its rent is very expensive. So I
Hmm.
had a couple of friends actually bring their sailboat from Wisconsin to Seattle, and in that time, they were kind of like, "Hey, like you should try it out," you know. So I decided to, and it was honestly a very life-changing experience. But I'm very happy to live on land again. I think that
Yeah.
there's some things that you have to sacrifice, but it was, I had actually never sailed before or anything, so I got to learn how to sail on this boat, and that was a very cool experience because living on it, I was right on the Puget Sound, so there's
Wow.
just mountains, beautiful sunrises, and just beautiful water. So it was a really cool experience.
Do you still sail?
No, I don't.
Oh,
I think that when I moved back here, it's just a little harder when you don't own the boat. So
yeah,
um,
right.
now I've been, always kind of wanting to get back into it. But the beautiful thing about Seattle is that the weather is more temperate. So you can have your boat out the entire year round.
Mhm.
And here in Wisconsin,
Mhm.
you have to kind of worry about storage fees and everything like that.
Right. True.
So it's just a little bit more of a hurdle to get that going. But yeah, I'm actually currently looking into like different sailing opportunities just because I miss it a lot.
Yeah, I did take a course from Hoofer Sailing right down
Oh,
at
cool.
UW right after I graduated. I'm like, this is the perfect time. I think I was working at the station and I would go down and have my little sailing class and we
Oh,
sail around, come in. It was so fun.
that's awesome.
Did
Yeah.
you ever take it anywhere outside of the Puget Sound? Did you go anywhere down the coast or anything or up the coast?
Oh no.
No. Okay.
No.
I didn't
I
know.
think I think the
Oh
sound
no.
waters, yeah. The sound waters were perfect because they were, they're kind of contained and the water's not too rocky or anything. So I think going out into the ocean would be a whole nother adventure that I probably was not ready for. So
Just send Olive out to the sea. Just have her do
yeah,
it instead.
she'll check it out. Yeah.
I mean, did
Show the
that
book. Yeah.
experience, obviously we've got Olive Takes to the Sea here. Did that experience, I mean, you obviously have some interest in boats, sailing.
Mhm.
Did that inform wanting to do this at all? Or what was
Yeah.
the driver for this book, being a
Yeah, I think
children's
that's
author?
a yeah. I think that's a great question. And I think it did. But when I moved back from Wisconsin, I just kind of had this storyline in my head, pop in my head. And it was about a young girl who, was fiercely independent and just wanted to do something on her own and would not accept help from her friends the whole time. But I really also wanted the story to display that she could do it on her own, like show that independence. The little young girl could do that on her own. But I also wanted to show that, when you are trying to do something on your own, sometimes it doesn't always go as planned. And having
Mhm.
that group of friends or close family members there to help you through it is also very important too. So I had this kind of story arch in my head when I moved back, and I think yes, the animals are heavily inspired by Seattle. I saw seals next to the boat. I saw a whale, like it's in the story. The Jerry great blue heron that's in the story is
Yeah.
actually a bird that was on the docks, and my friend had named him Jerry. So the publishers were like, all the other names are very, cutesy little kids, and then there's just Jerry. Like, where's he coming from?
So Jerry is real.
Jerry is real, yes. So I think that yeah, it was definitely heavily inspired by just, that time there. And when I was envisioning the illustrations and everything, it definitely had that Seattle setting. So the Pacific Northwest kind of waters and greenery and nature too. So
What
It's
age group is your book geared toward?
yeah.
it's geared towards ages 4 through 8.
Okay.
So yeah.
And I'll tell you, I bought it right away when I saw, and that's why I contacted Erin, because I saw the book. I saw she was talking about it on LinkedIn, and I bought it right away. And our granddaughter, our oldest granddaughter, is 2, and so she's a little below the age, but it was still like the pictures. She talked about the whale and Jerry and the the birds and the seal. She loved those, and the illustrations are wonderful as well as the story. And I kind of wanted to know what was the process for you to go, yeah, I've got this story in my head. I want to make this a reality, make it a book. Tell us about the process.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question too. Just because it was a long process. I moved back to Wisconsin in the summer of 2018. And I had this story in my head, but then it wasn't until COVID really hit, when I had all this free time, as we all did. And I just kind of was like, well, this is kind of an opportunity to just work on something creatively on the side. And so I wrote draft after draft, showed it to friends, showed it to people within my network that, had edited things before, just to kind of get eyes on it, to get some feedback, to make sure that the messaging was coming through. And if not, like, how do I change it? Because I think in journalism, I think it's just a completely different style of writing to write something creatively, just because in journalism we're so factual, we're so you want to be like very short and to the point so you can communicate very clearly to your audience,
Yeah.
which actually, as I'm saying this now, is probably why I was able to write a children's book, just because you do have to condense what you're saying into very few
Yeah.
words.
I was thinking that
um
same thing when I read it, Aaron. I
Yeah.
was thinking, you have to have clarity, you have to have brevity, and that works
Mhm.
for kids, for kids
yeah, so
stories.
that's actually a great thing that I'm currently realizing in real time. But I think, going through that process of creative writing is just so different than reporting. So I think it took me just a really long time to understand what kind of rhythms work, what word choices work. And my fiance, he is also a very creative person himself, and he's very good at kind of encouraging that creative process. And so he was very good at, like, reminding me, like, hey, like, you should work on that story, and like, just kind of giving me that little nudge of encouragement along the way. And so it wasn't until I think 2021, I'm probably getting the years mixed up, but about a year and a half ago, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna submit the story. We're gonna see what happens. And
So
We're
you
I
going to get
sent
our
it to
fact checkers
publishers
on that,
then?
by the way. So
Yeah. Oh, wait. But you sent it to publishers. You didn't self-publish. You sent it to publishers.
Yeah, and I only sent it to one publisher. They're called Orange Hat Publishing here in Milwaukee.
Mm.
And I had heard of them from a friend from college, and so and she had a great experience with them. So I was like, well, I'm gonna give a shot. They had an open for submissions, and
Mm.
the first time I sent it in, they responded saying that they liked the story, but it still needed some writing help. So they
Mm.
suggested, I get in contact with somebody to help the writing portion of it, and then encourage me to resubmit.
Mm.
And so I did just that, and I got in touch with an editor, and he was really great at kind of working with the text from a kid's perspective, which I think was key in this, because, actually at the beginning of the story, I had her just kind of finding a boat, and he said, it's probably not the best message to send the kids that they can just take a boat.
yeah.
Steal a boat.
Hey,
Yeah.
a boat.
We're encouraging thievery. Yeah.
Right, right. And so that was key, because I didn't even think about that. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of different things that he helped me with. And I definitely, it's a shock getting back so many edits. I think I had like 2 full single space pages of Word doc like edits that I had to work on.
Wow.
And when you first receive that, you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But then
Gotta have to swallow your pride a little bit, I imagine.
you do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure that you both are aware of, like, whenever you're writing something, like, the editing process is so important. So you just have to trust it. And
Mhm.
so I did, and it worked out great. So when I resubmitted it about 6 months later, then they accepted it, and then that kind of kicked off this whole project.
When did the illustrations come in?
Yep, that was my question.
Yeah.
We're both asking.
Yeah, those came in, so probably this time last year. So I met with Katie Gam, who she's local here in Milwaukee as well. And she had actually worked with Sam, my fiance, like in a previous job. And he suggested I check out her artwork because I did actually have a very specific vision in my head of what I wanted it to look like. And she definitely had that similar illustration kind of, I don't know, her artistic style was kind of aligned already with what I was thinking of. So, and the great thing about this publisher is that I had the option to find my own illustrator. So, so I took that option, and basically I met with Katie and kind of talked through the story with her, and we talked a lot about, like who the characters are and what the messaging is and everything. And so we started work. I think she turned in her sketches around this time last year for the first time. And she just nailed them completely. I mean, she turned in the sketches asking for edits, and I was like, nope, those are great. That looks exactly what I was thinking. So
You didn't give her 3 pages of notes or anything, huh?
Yeah.
no. It was honestly, she just completely nailed it. So and then
You're like, let's make Olive look more like a thief as she's stealing the boat.
exactly. Yes, Olive is a bandit. But she actually painted all of those illustrations with oil. So she
Oh, wow.
they're full oil paintings for everyone. And then so she was working on these through February this year. And then had turned, like, digitally scanned them in, and then that's when the publisher took over the design elements to put the book together.
That's
Wow.
really cool. Did those
So,
original oils go in a
yeah.
gallery ever? Or like, can people
Um,
buy the originals?
yeah, we had the originals at the book launch, and I think that my family went a little crazy and they all wanted to scoop them up. So I have a couple of my own as well, just because she was great and let me have a couple. And so I think those will be treasured for a really long time, just because
That's really cool.
they're beautiful.
I was
Yeah.
thinking that when reading this, I thought, boy, those would be wonderful pictures, just great pictures, great prints, whatever I mean, knowing their oils now, boy, that's really cool. And
Yeah.
so did you do, since your background kind of is with digital media and also with some of the analytics, did you do any analytics on, like, what kind of a story do kids want to hear? Was that involved in this, or was it just kind of the story was there in your head?
Yeah, I didn't do any kind of research.
Nothing like
It
that.
was more of a passion project for me. So it was more of me just wanting to tell the story. And I hadn't, thought about, wow, I really want to be a children's book author before or anything like that. It was just, I had this story in my head, and it felt I felt very connected to it. So I really wanted to make it come to life. And I also think the messaging is just so important for young girls to hear. I really wanted that messaging to reach a younger demographic where, like, they're kind of, very influenced by messaging at that age. And I think that having a storyline where it's a young girl who's confident, who's independent and adventurous, and she's able to do something on her own, but then she's also, paying tribute to the close friends that she has around her to make sure that she has a good community as well.
I haven't
Very
been
cool.
able to read the book yet. I don't have a copy of it, but I was reading about the book online, and just, the little blurb that I had read about it, it brought to mind a story that I swear every priest has given in a homily about, the man who's caught in the flood, and the the boat comes by. Do you want some help? No, I'm waiting for, for God to rescue me. And then the second person comes by, and then the helicopter. No, I'm waiting for God to, and then he ends up in heaven. And he's like, I was waiting. Why didn't you rescue me? And he's like, I sent 3 things. You didn't accept the help. Did you know that story? And did it influence your story at all?
No, I mean, I think I have heard that story before, but it definitely did not come to mind when I was putting it together. Yeah. I had an editor friend who suggested having a couple different friends approach her just because it adds more cadence to the story and kind of adds a little bit more depth to it as well. No, it's a funny story. I've definitely heard that before, but no, it didn't pop in my head when I was working on it.
Well, and the way I told it, that's like the shortest version of the story possible. I'm sure I didn't do it justice, but to keep it brief.
Well, and by having more characters too, there's more characters to market for, plush toys and, those kind of things down the road. I mean, just thinking business wise,
Right.
honestly, and honestly, Erin, I mean, it is one of those books, that when people read it, you could see it being a series of books. You could see Olive, the adventures of Olive kind of down the road. Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, I again get this question a lot, and I did not think about that when I wrote this book. I just wrote this one story and really wanted it to be really good and impactful. But I am kind of, I hear that a lot now, and so now my wheels are turning a little bit about what possible storylines could come after this because. I had a friend who say, you left the story really open-ended. I guess you're going to have another sequel coming out. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize I did that. But it is kind of fun to know that that could be a possibility and another fun project to work on.
Yeah.
Well, I want to know
if you
what
ever make it a
happens next.
cartoon, keep us in mind for cartoon voices. We're available.
Okay, sounds good.
I could do a good whale. Yeah.
That is pretty good. Yeah.
Hey, and for me now, this is what Puget Sound looks like. So I've never been there, but this is what Puget Sound looks like. So in my head, so you mentioned, you never thought about being a children's book author, and so do you identify yourself as a children's book author now, or are you still a digital journalist, a digital specialist?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely the word author is new to me for sure. I definitely when I first started hearing people say that about my work, I was like, that's not me. But it does I think that it's a combination of the two. I think I identify more as an editor now just because of all the stories I've been reviewing over the past 2 years. But I think editor and author, like I feel like in this field you're a combination of all of everything. So a creative maybe. I don't know.
Right.
After you've had your work edited so closely with all of that feedback, has that influenced how you edit other people's work?
I definitely am probably more of an empathetic editor. I think that and that started even before I was, working on this book. And I think that that has always been at the forefront when I'm editing somebody's work, because I know that writing is so personal and very, the writer put in a lot of effort into what they're doing. And so I think that even though when you are editing a piece, the end goal is to always make sure that it is resonating with the audience and the correct information is getting through. I think that the writers, you want to encourage them to keep writing. So if you are too red-handed with the pen, then you're probably going to diminish their confidence a little bit. So I've always kind of been keeping that in mind whenever I work with writers. I always kind of have a process with editing where if there are significant changes, then I actually don't put any red edits on the page, and I have a conversation with them first to make sure that they have those big changes made on their own. And then if there's any, smaller structural changes, that's usually when I go in with the track changes or anything like that, just because I think those are a little less scary. But I definitely have thought a lot about that process, just myself being an editor or being a writer for a while and kind of being on the other end of that process when I became an editor, I wanted to make sure that I'm not only making sure that the story is getting across to the audience, but also making sure that the writer continues to write and they feel encouraged to keep doing so.
You mentioned before at Discover Magazine, you're kind of small but nimble. So basically, you're working really hard.
Yeah.
Are there still a fair amount of people in the industry who are writing stories for things like Discover Magazine and other publications out there? A fair amount of them who are in the digital world kind of untethered. They're doing work just as freelance and they're making a living at it. And is that a hard thing to do?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I work with a lot of freelancers, and I think the cool thing to see is that a lot of these freelancers are just so talented. And when they pitch to us, we usually include all of the other places that they've been published in to provide their portfolio and provide examples of their work. And I'm just always impressed by how many writers out there have been published in these big magazines or newspapers, like the New York Times, the Guardian, the BBC. And so it's just really, it's also inspiring to see that too, because I'm like, oh, that would be really cool to be published in those places too. So, but I think I can't speak to the freelance role, as if I've never done that full time on my own. But I do know that, it can be really beneficial, but I'm sure that it's also a lot of hard work, and it's, a lot of pitching to places that you're not sure if they're going to accept your pitch. And then also a lot of work going into the story itself, just kind of trying to get it to the point where it's good for publishing. So I think that the world of freelancing is definitely a lot of work. I think that that's kind of where it is, but it is also very cool because you're able to work with so many different publications at the same time.
Right.
When they come into pitch, is it a specific idea that they have and they say, I have this story idea, would you like me to develop it for you? Or is it more like, I'd like to write for you, here's my body of work?
It's definitely a specific idea, and that's kind of what we ask for, just because we publish so much each month that we definitely need specific ideas, because we just don't have the time to work individually with as many freelancers that are out there. So I definitely recommend freelancers to pitch a very specific idea, give a little bit of background, give, like some scientific studies that are already out there that they can, already start reporting on. And that usually does a better way of kind of getting through the queue, just so that we were able to review it a little bit more quicker and then kind of move on to the next story.
So your most recent story for Discover was the shipwreck story and the lifeboat on the floor of the body of water. What lake? What was it? A lake, right? Was it trying to remember? Was it
Yeah,
one of the Great Lakes?
It was in the Great Lakes. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have to pitch too as well? Do you have to come and say, hey, I've got this great idea, and then pitch it to your colleagues and kind of go through the process as well?
I'm just picturing you looking in the mirror and being like, hey, Erin, it's Erin. I've got a great idea.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I am kind of the one that okays all the ideas on the website. So I am the one who kind of sifts through all of the new scientific releases. They're called embargoes, and they're sent to you can sign up for their emails twice a day. But there's a lot of scientific studies that gets released all the time. And so my job is to kind of be there to sift through each one and see what resonates most with Discover, what resonates with our audience, and then making sure that we have internal people to actually work on that. So the shipwreck article came through and we were a little bit short on time and staff. So I jumped in and just kind of wrote that embargo myself, which is really fun for me because I'm not able to do that as much in this role. But and the story itself was, I'm fascinated by shipwrecks and that kind of scientific studies. But but then I also, every month we're sifting through our freelancing, pitching ideas, but then also doing a lot of research online. So looking at Google Trends, looking at our analytics, looking at what has been what published last year around this time that did really well. Are there any topics that we should revisit? And then we also kind of host a brainstorming meeting where people from different teams actually join in, just because it's great to get a different perspective from, we are so ingrained with what we know what does well on the website that sometimes it kind of creates blinders. So having other people from different teams that are interested in different things brings in great perspectives. So that's kind of when we brainstorm about, okay, what are all the ideas that are interesting right now around ancient humans, or we're going back to the moon in the fall, so let's cover some topics about space and the moon and astronauts. And so yeah, it's a lot of coming up with a lot of really fun ideas and trying to kind of sift through them to make sure that they are the right ones for Discover as well.
What
Very
advice
cool.
do you have for others who might be interested in going into digital journalism, digital media?
That's another good question. I think the advice that I have is that if you are familiar with print, mostly for journalism, and you wanting to get into web, I think you have to have the perspective that the web is a different medium. It's a completely different beast, and you have to make sure that you write a different way. So I think with it's a little tricky. It's a little bit different with the web with how you even write, just because um, if your audience is happening upon your article on a website, they are not getting an introduction to the topic. They're not getting an introduction to the type of topics that you typically cover. They're just seeing this one headline that you have to capture their attention with. So when you think about it like that, and it's only one person and they're just viewing their laptop as they're reading your article, you are really only writing to one person. So when you're looking at your article and you're thinking about who your audience is, it's really important to know like who that audience actually is when you are writing. And then also the web, our attention spans are not that great anymore. So it's best to, I actually consider it more like news writing. So putting a lot of the most important information at the very top, just because people are probably not going to get that far down into the article, unfortunately.
Don't bury the lead, right? Don't bury the lead.
Exactly. So it's a little bit more newsy with the the lead style, but then also very short and to the point with web stories as well, just because people are scrolling and they just want to know the information. So getting that to them right away is the best way to do it.
I get angry with myself at that sometimes, Erin and Carrie, because like there's some really great articles that'll come through my news feed, like from the New Yorker or from the Guardian, and I'll start reading them, and there's really good, and it's like, oh, this is just taking me too long, like it's just too much, and then I'm always like, I'm going to go back to it, I'm going to go back and read it, but then it's not like having the magazine sitting on your coffee table and you're just going to go back to it. It's gone. It's off into the ether somewhere. So I'm taking that to heart. That's great advice, even for a podcast like ours, where we pretty much know people who would listen to a podcast like ours have some interest in journalism or in broadcasting or in newspaper or whatever. So, but it's hard to get that attention. I mean, a lot of people call it clickbait or whatever, but it's really just writing a good headline, a good way to grab someone's attention and be honest, I hope, for most of us. But that's great advice, I think. Just that was just my aside. Carry on.
All right, my next question.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people say, oh, I'd love to publish a book, or I've had an idea and it's on my bucket list to write a book. Where would you tell people to start if they have an idea that they actually want to get into the world?
Just start writing, just get something on the page. I think that a lot of people are, especially if you aren't a writer yourself to begin with, you're kind of afraid of that first draft. And I think the honesty and like the truth about writing is that that first draft is never good. So there are like some of the best writers out there in the world, and their first draft is never the one that gets published. So I think if you just are really committed to the idea and you really want to make it work, then you just have to get words on a page, and then you can go from there. If you just start with something, you know, you can revisit it, you can edit it yourself. And then I think the second piece of advice is to not be afraid of the editor, just because I think that we also get really attached to our writing, and sometimes it can be really scary to put that in front of somebody who's going to change it and make it, you know, maybe sound different. But at the end of the day, that process is not, it's more about the reader and making sure that the reader is understanding what you're saying. And that's your goal if you want to tell a story and be an author. So I think that that's my second piece of advice, is to don't be afraid.
Great advice.
Well, and in the publishing process, do you have to, I mean, is there expenses for you in that process, or is it pretty much, you know, do you get paid during that process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm working with what's kind of a hybrid model. So I think traditional publishers, they take on the responsibility of making sure that the book is financially successful.
Uh-huh.
So typically that means that the author is, you know, is paid from the publisher. The model that I have set up is it's in between a publisher and an independent publisher, or independently publishing it yourself. Where I have a publisher and they are able to, you know, put the book together and making sure it's on all the right sites and everything like that. But now it's up to me to make sure that the book is financially successful. So,
Okay.
so I do make money from the actual book sales, but it's all about the promotion that I can do and where I can get it out to people. So yeah, so doing events and talks like this are really helpful, just because it's kind of getting the book in people's, you know, reminding them that it's out there. And so it's definitely, that's the next stage of the process that I actually think that my marketing background has been helping a
Yeah.
lot. So
Yeah.
and that's, yeah, it's fun. It's like just a complete marriage of everything that I've kind of worked on throughout my career. So
Where can people buy the book?
they can buy it on my website. I have a website that you can buy directly from me, and I can always sign copies as well, which is kind of nice if you purchase directly through me. It is listed on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com.
Like
There it
that.
is.
There it is.
Oh,
This
it's
is worth
signed.
millions.
Yes.
Um,
What is
and
your website? And we'll put it in the show notes too. So if you miss it the
oh,
first time,
perfect.
please.
Yeah, it's I believe it's olivetakestothe.com. So it's pretty simple, but I can also send you the website after we're done chatting as well.
I'm jotting it down. Excellent. We'll put it in the show notes so nobody has to search too hard for it.
Oh, thank you.
And do you try to get into libraries and things like that as well?
Yeah, and that's part of the process right now, which has been really interesting too, is just kind of figuring out how to go about that.
Mhm.
I've definitely submitted it into the libraries, and then approached different bookstores as well. So there's some bookstores in Wauwatosa that have the book now. And then there's a local bookstore here in Bayview, Milwaukee, that actually carries it as well too. So, but that's just me kind of approaching bookstores in person. I think in person has been really helping, because I think that they get a lot of submissions throughout their days about books, you know, from authors that they want to carry. So approaching them in person has really helped, and then kind of developing that relationship, and then yeah, just kind of introducing myself in the book. And I think what really sells it is the illustrations. Katie did such a good job on them that it's really just, you know, like people look at through the book and they're just like, wow, these are so beautiful. So I think, yeah, that's kind of the other new step of this process that I wasn't really, you know, I'm not really prepared for, but I'm figuring it out as I go. But it's been fun. You get to connect with local stores and everything here.
Well, it's not that hard because I've seen it on Hallmark movies where there'll be authors and they just go into
Yeah.
bookstores and they buy 500 copies and then they meet their future husband or wife too. So,
That's right.
you know,
Yes.
it happens all the time. No,
And
that's
beautiful
very
music
interesting.
plays in the background.
Right, right. That's
Yes.
hard work. That's hard work putting yourself out there and putting something you've created out there.
Mhm.
And having the confidence to go out and do it. So I applaud you on that. That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Do you have any ideas of maybe going beyond children's books into a novel or anything like that, or is that way out beyond what you've thought about yet?
I've definitely had some ideas. Definitely, I've not had creative writing now, or like I wouldn't, I probably wouldn't go the fiction route, but I think that with all of my experience with reporting and everything, I think that I would probably want to do something like a longer version of a journalism story or something
Mhm.
along those lines. But
Yeah.
I don't have any, I have like rough drafts of ideas in my head right now,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
nothing set in stone. And that'll probably definitely be down the road just because of the amount of work that went into this one children's book has definitely
Yeah.
taught me
You
that I
still
think
have marketing to do for this one, right?
exactly, yeah.
And a
Does
job to
the
do.
And a
Yeah.
job, yes.
Does the publisher you went through also do other novels or nonfiction for adults or only children?
I think they do nonfiction for adults, and
Mm.
they have, I think, a YA section as well. So,
Mm.
and I think
Cool.
that it's a separate portion of the company,
Mm.
but yeah, so I think they do that as well.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna wrap up pretty quick, but I just want to ask you because I always ask our people who have worked in. Did you ever do any TV? You didn't intern in TV or anything, did you, Erin?
No,
No.
never did TV.
Well, I always ask people like what their worst job was. Do you have
Oh,
a memory of a worst job, Erin,
that is a good question too.
without hurting feelings?
I think I think I can say this one because it's not in my field. I worked on the golf course when I was in college, and I think that I had one summer where I worked as a beer cart girl, and that was not
Oh,
for me at all. So I think that I had that one summer job, and I was like, I don't think I need to come back to the golf course at all. So
you can write a
um,
novel about it someday.
Yeah,
yeah,
really.
maybe. Yeah. But honestly, I think that I've been really lucky with all of my professional jobs that I've had. It's been, I've worked with a lot of really great people and a lot of encouraging people as well. And I think that the connections that I still have today go back even 10 years. So I think that it's been great. Yeah.
And do you have a dream job, a thirst job, something you're still striving for out there? And you're still young.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I've always said that my dream job would to work at National Geographic. That's always
Mm.
been, the long-term goal of mine.
Mhm.
I think that I, I think I'm kind of doing a version of that at Discover
Yeah.
Magazine right now. It's almost a baby version of National Geographic, so I'm definitely getting a taste of it now, which has been really fun. But yeah, I would love to do something on a larger scale for a publication, down the line.
Well, then you can come
Very
back and
good.
be on old news again.
Yeah,
That's right.
that sounds great.
Well,
Great
hey,
talking with you. Thank you for all your great advice and insight.
yeah, it
Yeah,
was
thank you
awesome.
so much. Yeah,
And
thank
just
you
a
so
reminder to
much.
folks, Olive Takes to the Sea by Erin Berge, illustrated by Katie, was it Gam? Katie Gam?
Yes, Katie Graham. Mhm.
Check it out. We'll put the links in our show notes so you can go buy it. And then you can also go to Erin's website, and also we'll link to Discover Magazine's website as well.
Yeah,
Because maybe they want to read the story about the shipwreck and many other
I
great
know I
stories
do.
out there as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some great stuff out there. And if you want more shows like this, listen to our podcast. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll have more great guests like Erin.
Thanks for tuning in to Old News with Dan and Carrie.
That's old news for now.
Join us next time.